Scots Pines? You understand how to train and build Scots Pine? No? Okay, so there are very different, very significant differences between black pine, white pine, red pine, Scots pine, Yugo pine, all those pines, okay? But those big differences can kind of be summed up in two major groups, right? You've got single flush species, and then you've got multi-flush, okay? So these single and multi-flush species, right? When we say single flush, one growth that will extend and fully mature into a set of needles in a year, okay? So this is our Scots, Yugo, right? White pine. Most of our North American natives, too, fall into this category. Now, this is our black pine, red pine, okay? In North America, we've got a few species where we can candle prune in the middle of summer, which reproduces another flush of growth that fully matures in that same year, okay? So the way that we handle these two different types of pines in terms of training, very, very different, okay? When we're dealing with a single flush species, right? Very fundamental concept. When we're developing, okay, development, our major technique is to grow and prune. Now, understanding what growing and pruning means, a very big deal, okay? We can't just grow and cut them anywhere, because they will not respond, right? Our chances of predicting what will occur goes to virtually zero. The tree is now, that situation is in that tree's hand, okay? So when we say grow and prune, what we're talking about, when we have these branches, and you're going to see branches like this today, where we have a very long internode, a very long branch, call this a lion's tail, right? So it's this long tail and a little fluff on the end. When you've got this very long branch and we're saying we want buds back in here to build ramification on, how do we get those, okay? We first have to build strength in the tip of this branch. Thank you. We first have to build strength in the tip of this branch, okay? So in year one, we allow this candle to grow, extend, and needle out, okay? That gives us a foliage mass. Foliage mass here. The more foliage we have, the more solar panels or surface area for needles to accumulate photosynthetic resources we have on the tree. Does that make sense? So when we start talking about the way a tree survives, the way a tree feeds itself, the way a tree generates energy, that's all done through photosynthesis. Is that understood? Fundamental concept, okay? The more panels that we have accumulating those resources, the more food we have feeding the root system, all right? So in year one, when we've got this very sparse, spindly branch, and all that's existing on that one branch is that tip, that lion's tail, okay? We're going to add more foliage. So after I prune this today, I wire it all out, you're going to allow this tree to grow next year without pruning anything, okay? Add foliage mass. Now, what happens is, as this foliage mass increases, and the sun gives us all those good rays, okay? We're going to start generating energy that's going to flow down to the roots of the tree. And as the tree starts to accumulate more and more resources in the roots start to grow, they're going to say, hey, that branch out there, that's giving us a lot of goodness. Let's go ahead and provide more resources, water, and nutrition to keep that guy growing. Okay? So this is going to continue to accumulate. This is going to continue to provide, to accumulate, to provide, to accumulate, to provide, right? And in doing that, the tree says, oh man, now I've got the resources that I need to start setting myself up to have a bigger house, right? Bigger house, nicer car, having some success with the business, okay? Year two, okay? Now, we have this where we have these buds set up because we allow that photosynthetic mass to increase. Okay, now we've got this mass here. And we're going to get candle elongation again. Okay? Now we let this elongate. We let these needles come out. And then we prune this. Okay? So we prune that. So if we leave this alone at this point, what will happen is this will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and these won't turn into foliage mass because all of the energy is going toward the tip, and the tree says, I want to be a big tree. It doesn't know it wants to be a bonsai. Okay? So we get these back buds set up in year one. After we do this, next year we allow that photosynthetic mass to accumulate. We get that photosynthetic surface area generating resources. The roots say yeah, the foliage says yeah. We get back buds set up. Year 2, these back buds are saying, we're waiting, we're waiting, we're waiting. This guy grows, needles out. We come back in here, and we prune back. That growth, always leaving just a little, small little shoot from that new growth with at least 2 pairs of needles behind our cut, remaining on the shoot. And what that does is that pushes that energy back into these guys to turn into branches, okay? Fundamental method of generating back budding and starting to train a raw piece of material that's in the single flush species. Yes, sir?
That's 2 pairs of needles on the current year's growth.
That's 2 pairs on the current year's growth. Yes, exactly. So you can't prune back behind this because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen, okay? So what will happen in the future is these start to grow, these turn into foliage masses on their own, and then you can cut back to that, right? So in 3 years' time, if you employ this technique, year 1, get the back buds, year 2, get the elongation, year 3, you can cut back. You will start to have very, very ramified branches by year 3. Probably showable tree if you're really good at this by year 4, right? Highly refined tree by year 5. Okay? Very rapid development. If we do it really, really well, okay? So that's developmental. Now, when we get to that year 4, and we're talking about refinement, okay, the name of the game is pinching. All right, so we said development is grow and prune. Now we're talking about refinement. We get that tree to that point where we've got those interior buds, and we're starting to develop branches that are taking on this characteristic shape that we're looking for, yeah? All right? And we still have some sparseness here because we only had those interior buds that started to develop into branching. Remember, we had this guy that was super strong that we cut back to here. And this is what we have. We've got that beginning of that branch. We need a little bit more. Chances are we'll have some back buds in here. Now what's going to happen? These candles are going to elongate. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to pinch this off right at the edge of our silhouette while it's still soft, supple, and green. All right? Okay, so there'll be little needle buds in here, but they haven't elongated yet. So while this is still soft, you pinch these off. Okay? Pines in particular, and this is true of any conifer, pines in particular have a very strong hormone in the tip of them called auxin. Auxin, right? That is the hormone that allows them to be apically dominant, because what this hormone does is it tells all these buds behind it, you can't grow. You cannot grow. I'm going to grow because I'm going to be the biggest, strongest bud. It suppresses lateral bud growth behind that. So when you pinch this off, you remove auxin, you give these buds behind it a chance to grow. Okay? So maybe these guys elongate. We'll pinch those at the silhouette. And then maybe we even have secondary or tertiary buds that grow, and we pinch those at the silhouette. And in doing that, we allow multiple buds to develop in 1 year, increasing density exponentially. Does that make sense? So once you get those interior buds developed into branches, by pinching, you develop the density very, very quickly. That's why I said 3 years we can have a tree that has a good structure, 4 years potentially showable, 5 years very, very refined. Because once you get that branching set up, that refinement happens very, very quickly. You now have needle mass, you now have development occurring, you now have back buds set up, and all you're trying to do is manage that growth to define that shape. Is that, you guys got that? Any questions about that? Okay. So I'm not going to talk about multi-flush or black pine. That's a huge conversation, right? We don't need to have that today, because that's not the subject of our endeavor. So I'm going to remove some superficial branches here that are structurally flawed. Right? Now, structurally flawed branches, that's a very generic term. Understanding what is structurally flawed, I had a few questions. I had a few questions from the last one, like how did you prune that so quickly? Right? Well, while I'm standing here telling you guys stories, in the beginning I cleaned it up, right? That in itself is a very, very big step that's very difficult to teach. And one of the things that I was saying about that is that step alone was the last thing that I learned as an apprentice. How to prune, how to remove structural flaws, how to set a tree up to have a good structure to move forward. The way that Mr. Kimura taught that to me, right, is he would prune the trees structurally, he would set the structure, I would do the fine wire. As I started to advance, he would prune the trees, set 1 or 2 structural branches, I would set the rest of the structure, and then I would fine wire. He would prune, I would set all of the structural branches, and then I would fine wire. And eventually, I would prune, set the structure, do the fine wiring. Okay, so that was the last step in my apprenticeship. Now, the way that he taught that was, at first, He pruned so I saw what good structure was. He set the structure, and then I saw how that structure was set, and then I fine wired. And then he let me do some of the easier structure. And then he let me do the hard structure. And then he let me do the pruning. But by that time, when I started pruning, I had seen so many examples of good structure, I knew what bad structure was. And it was very easy to eliminate it, right? So he worked backwards, which was a very interesting technique. And so trying to teach my own students how to prune structurally, all of a sudden I'm saying, man, that was pretty ingenious how he taught me how to do that. Right? But people say, why does it take you 6 years in Japan? That's just a long time. Yep, there's a lot to learn. A lot to learn. So the other thing I wanted to touch on, while I was up here, the question was asked, are you going to repot the juniper? And I said, no, absolutely not. That would be an absolute death sentence for that tree, right? That would be a bad thing to do. I think I need to expand on that a little bit. When you do this kind of work on a tree, it's necessary to understand where the strength in the tree lies. Okay? So when we're talking about pines, where does the strength in pines come from? You guys have any ideas? The roots? The roots, very good. The strength in the pine comes from the roots. Now let me ask you, how do you know that? What tells you where the strength comes from? What's that? The needles, what did you say? How they get their food. Okay, so where does the food come from?
The nails.
From the things in the soil and photosynthesis. So I got two different answers there, right? So let's be very clear about things. Fertilizer, right? We typically tend to think of fertilizer as a food generically, right? We give our trees food. Fertilizer, very much not a food, right? What is fertilizer? Okay? Fertilizer is a supplement. Right? If you don't give a tree a fertilizer, does it die? No. Right? Because it's feeding itself through photosynthesis. Right? The photosynthesis is the production of carbohydrates and sugars by capturing of the sun's energy and using that to drive chemical processes that build these sugars and carbohydrates. Right? Fertilizer is a supplement to provide the resources to drive and accelerate growth. Okay? Two very different things. So when we talk about the strength of pines coming from the roots, we still haven't answered the question, how do we know that? How do we know that? If you cut a pine, what does it do? Well, it bleeds, okay, very good. It bleeds. How does it respond now? Okay, it backbuds. It backbuds, right? So we're saying let it grow, prune it, all of a sudden we get backbuds, right? If we take a black pine, we allow black pine to grow, we cut it in the middle of the summer, cut all of its new growth off, and what does it do? Pushes a second flush, right? Now if we did that same thing to a juniper, what would happen to a juniper? Juniper grows, cut off all its new growth, what happens? It's probably going to die, right? Or at least be heavily, heavily impacted in a negative way. So then what does that tell us about junipers? Where does the strength in the foliage come from? Where does this come from? I even drank a lot of coffee. Right? Okay. So strength in junipers comes from the foliage, and we know that because if we remove the foliage, and the gentleman came up, he said, how do we maintain this foliage? Do we pinch back the tips, or do we allow it to grow and prune? And I said, you have to allow it to grow, and then prune it, so that you maintain the strength in the tips. If you're always pinching back the tips, you're always pinching back the strength. Strength is in the foliage, the roots get weak, the tree starts to go downhill. In a pine, we're saying, okay, we can cut off a lot of this growth, the roots are pushing up the strength, and the tree will positively respond. Two very different aspects of how we train trees, okay? Now, when we start to say, okay, are we going to repot this tree after doing that kind of work? We remove 3/4 of the foliage on that juniper. The strength comes from the foliage, we remove 3/4 of the foliage. Did we make that tree weaker? Yes. So we're going to allow that to recover for 6, 8, 10, 12 months. That tree is healthy, then we repot it. And with that foliage mass, we regenerate the root mass that we impact by repotting. Okay? Now, could this pine potentially be repotted after doing this kind of work? This would have a higher success rate, repotting this, than the juniper after this type of work. However, we're still going to err on the side of caution and not repot until the springtime because we want to let the tree recover, lick its wounds, make sure that everything's good to go before we do that second very major operation to the tree. Does that make sense? Okay, very good. So I'm just getting rid of anything that I definitely, absolutely know cannot be a part of the tree. And there's a very major thing that pines do that cause a lot of problems in terms of bonsai. in terms of how they grow. Have we heard of whorls?
Yes.
Whorls where the branches occur in 3, 4, maybe even 5 branches coming out of one internode. What's the problem with that? What does that do?
Thickens up that area.
Okay, it becomes inverse taper, right? Causes structural problems. So when we say, all right, let's go through this tree and remove all structural flaws, what we're saying is let's go through this tree and remove all areas where we've got 3, 4, 5 branches coming out of one node, right? Let's remove any branches that we absolutely cannot use for the structure of this tree. Let's get it down to bare bones in terms of what's structurally sound before we ever start styling the tree so that we don't build the tree on any superficial structure that is not going to appreciate or improve with age. Does that make sense? So these things are immediate. This is just boom, 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 taking care of business. Don't even have to think about these. Okay, so I'm leaving a few points and junctions where there's going to be more than 2 things at that location. And you guys are going to help me decide how we handle those areas, because we're going to leave some options for styling. Now again, I haven't actually seen this tree for very long myself, but just in doing this work, you familiarize yourself with a tree. So anytime I go someplace, people always say, "Oh, be careful of that branch, and this branch was broken, and last year I tore that and stuff," right? A good bonsai professional, when they're working, they should see all that. Yep, okay, good, got it. Already knew that. First thing you see. You guys having a good convention so far?
Yes.
Yeah, good, good. Okay, so we got that guy. Maybe this will be something, huh? Starting to see what's going on here. Bear with me a minute longer, we're almost there. Okay. Alright, so all of the really obvious stuff is out. A few areas where I left a few more because decisions are going to be made. Not a bad tree, would you say? Okay, so here's the question for this tree. What is this going to look like? It took you a while, it took a minute. Subtle joke, right? Okay, so I uncovered this base a little bit, and it looks like we have good rootage. Base is here, so we've got a little bit of an undercut here. We'll probably leave the soil line there. Okay, so this starts to go in, so we just leave that soil line there. So there's not really any room to tilt this up, because we're going to start to uncover a flaw here, right? We've got good roots here, we've got good roots here. So the base is solid. We've got a good distribution of roots, all right? Now we have 2 very interesting features on this tree. We've got a good solid base, but we've got this trunk or branch here, and then we've got great movement here. The question is, do we use this? Do we use this? Do we use both of them? And how do we do it? What do you guys think? You're going to leave it to me. Appreciate that. It's a lot of pressure. Take this off?
Yeah.
No? You like it?
Yeah, that's different.
What do you guys think? You guys over here, you're very quiet, stoic. You want to keep it? You want to take it off? Off? Okay, here we go. Everybody who wants to keep it, hands in the air. Everybody who wants to keep it.
Half, keep half.
Everybody who wants to take it off, hands in the air. That is exactly a 50% divide in the room. You're killing me. You're killing me.
What about gin?
Okay, all right, so we can gin it. Here's the thing. If we keep this guy here, if we keep this, we have to take this off. Okay? We have to take this off, right? If we keep this, we take this off. If we get rid of this, we have to keep this. Okay? So this is a major decision. This is decision time, right? This is never going to be my tree. Ever. Except for this hour-long period right here, this is not my tree. So somebody who's going to take this home, whoever wants this the worst, you need to yell the loudest.
There's not enough tape.
Take it off. Not enough tape. Take it off. Could we reduce the fatness of this? Could we reduce the fatness of this? We could let this thicken a little bit more, right? Are you talking about taper-wise?
Yeah.
Take the top portion off. Well,
Yes.
if you're going to leave it, it has to now represent the apex of the tree. Okay? It has to represent the apex of the tree. Meaning, this is going to be the upper portion, and we're either going to shed this top thicker portion, okay? We're going to shed this top thicker portion and have more like a semi-cascading or maybe a tree that moves out like this. Not necessarily windswept, right? Windswept is a different style altogether. It's a very abused term in bonsai, right? But to have a tree that has a very strong branch coming out in this direction, very realistic, right? But this is going to be the top of our tree. If we're going to shorten it, right, it doesn't do us any good because these aren't particularly good branches. There's nothing good down here to build something in type of. Now we know you can get there through the years, so longevity speaking, we could do that, but this isn't a good structure for just a branch. It's either the apical portion of the trunk, this becomes the trunk line, this becomes a branch, or it comes off altogether. Off.
Camera's trying to handle it. Take it off in space. Next question. He's not sure.
Alright, here we go.
It's coming off.
No, he's taking the other one off.
It's taking it off.
So I'm pulling executive weight here.
Yeah. Oh, we've done that.
We're going to keep it.
Yeah.
All right, so here's the reason. Let me explain my decision-making process. This is very not beautiful, right? So we have good taper through here. This is very, very bulky here. So if this is going to be the apex of our tree, this is always going to be very bulky. When you talk about tapers, we talked about the juniper. Somebody said, tell us about the taper from base to tip, right? With the juniper, we talked about the base being flawed, right? As well as some of the things that also impeded the structure of that tree being the branches emerging from the top. Well, along with that, junipers typically don't have good taper, right? Particularly when they're field grown or when they're collected trees. So you deal with flaws in junipers, but pines need to have good taper. That's a very major aspect of a good pine. Taper from the base all the way to the top of the tree. Okay? So we do have good taper coming out to this portion. Now, if we can get back budding in here, this is going to be a very worthy apex at some point. This, however, never going to be a very worthy apex, and we have good tight back budding in here already to build a tighter portion in the interior portion of this branch as the new leader of this trunk in the future. All right? The other thing was, this was a very compromised branch. If we take this off and this branch is now a major feature of this tree, it was never going to be something that looked good. All right? So this is our better option in terms of good of all features on the tree, and we're going to take this down and now use this as the apical portion. You guys with me?
Yeah.
All right, that was tough. I had to do all of that decision-making process while I was getting petitioned by you guys. Politicking, right? What's that? It's Canberra. In the spirit of Canberra. Oh yes, this is going to be good. All right. So I'm going to create a few pieces of gin. Now pines and gin, junipers and gin, very different way that the Deadwood structures itself. And when you create Deadwood, this will go for your Australian natives too. I don't know what your Australian natives Deadwood looks like. Okay. It's dead. Some of that Deadwood can be deceiving, right? So when you start talking about artificial creation of Deadwood to create something that looks natural, nice, you say artificial, but you don't want it to look artificial. It looks artificial, that's not doing good bonsai. you've got to identify the key characteristics of what makes good deadwood on pines, good deadwood on junipers, good deadwood on this species of juniper versus this species of pine on spruce, on yew. If you're talking in Australia, I don't know what good deadwood looks like on a eucalyptus. I don't know what good deadwood looks like on a bottle brush. I don't know what good deadwood looks like on melaleuca or a Monterey pine, right? Even though that's not native, you guys have a lot of them. And they're better than they are in the United States too. But on deadwood on pines, you never want to have a big, pronounced log-like gin, right? You always want to take it down to a significantly decreased size. Whereas on a juniper, you may leave a big, flamboyant piece of deadwood. You never do that on a pine, okay? We're going to take this down to a really broken, ugly, unkept, not too smooth, short, stubby gin. We're going to do that to both of these guys. What's that? Always break it and tear it. Mr. Kimura used to make us create gins on pines in 3 cuts. It took you longer than 3 cuts. You were wasting time. I'm wasting time. Officially. Gotta look good though, right?
What did you addressing as?
Oyakata. Oyakata. Oyakata means master. Yep. Okay, so here's our general structure. Now, we have one area here where you see we've got these 2 branches. These count as one because they emerge just past the junction. Okay, we've got these guys. We've got this major guy here, and then this major trunk, now our apical area of the tree. This counts as a branch as well. So that means we've got to remove one of these 2, since we're keeping this, to maintain structural integrity in this area. Now I'm going to say, because we've got this major branch here, let's go ahead and get rid of this. Do you guys agree?
Yes.
Okay? And now when we get to this area here, you see how we have this guy, this kind of stubby guy here? We've got this better branch on the interior. I'm going to say this is the less quality of these 2 branches at this internode. I'm going to get rid of this. Alright? And now we get to the apical area and we see we've got this very, very heavy branch here. Right? But it has a heavy foliage load on it as well. We've also got these 2 finer guys. Because we don't know what's going to happen with this back budding, I'm going to leave 3 branches here for now, knowing that in the future one of these 3 has to come off. If this guy back buds, it's going to be a better transition of taper. This will be our eventual apex. If it doesn't back bud, then we've got these guys that have tighter buds in between and they're younger. We'll let a new bud emerge, let that grow longer, and grow that as our new apical portion of the tree. Make sense? This is one area that we're going to maintain ambiguity in. Okay. So then I've got to come to this portion of the tree, knowing what we know now, make some decisions in terms of how we're going to train this guy. Typically, when you're growing pines, anytime you have a section like this, where you've got one branch growing off of the top, this is going to be very difficult to turn into a very good branch. Unless this is just absolutely unutilizable, we're always going to take this off. Okay? That guy comes off. All right. In this area here, we see we've got these 2 very major branches, one on the back, one here on the interior. Now we've also got this guy down here. Is this a very important branch? What do you think? Yeah? Is this an important branch?
Yes.
No? Yeah?
Yes,
No.
it is. It is.
We'll find out.
Important? Important?
No.
Yeah? I better take a look. I didn't realize this was going to cause a coup.
I think we were the last one. The bottom one.
Okay. So once again, I'm going to leave you guys with a few options. I'm going to keep both of these. Okay? Technically, I would probably say in the future, this is going to come off. Right? Because we have this in the back that's going to develop, fill this negative space if we remove this. Alright? We don't want to remove too much foliage at one time, and we don't know how this is going to develop. Alright? So there was a species of tree called the Zuisho white pine. We had hundreds of them at Mr. Kimura's nursery. We had so many Zuisho white pine that he and a few other clients that had a ton of Zuisho white pine decided to create a Zuisho white pine exhibition because they wanted to improve the marketability of Zuisho white pine so they could sell them. right? So now there's the Zuisho 10 in Tokyo, right? So for the Zuisho 10, we had 70 some Zuisho white pine that we exhibited every year. And what would happen is people would go there, see Zuisho white pine, go to a grower, buy Zuisho white pine, bring it to Mr. Kimura, and have us develop them from scratch. Now, if you pursue the development of Zuisho white pine very quickly with good technique, you can make a showable tree in 3-4 years. Just like we talked about, exact same training method as the Scots Pine, right? So we were always developing those from scratch. And one of the things that Mr. Kimura pushed on us big time when he was pursuing the structural development of Zuisho white pine is that in 2 years this branch will go, in 5 years this branch is going to be very full, in 7 years this branch is going to be shortened, in 9 years this branch probably won't be necessary anymore, in 12 years we're going to prune this back, in 15 years this is no longer going to be the apex, and in 20 years this is what the tree's going to look like, right? So he's thinking very long term. And the number of branches he was leaving on that tree, significantly more than what the tree ultimately needed. But he also drove home the point that this branch helps this apex develop. And this apex helps this branch develop. And this branch helps this branch develop. And this branch helps this apex develop. Because on a pine, unlike a juniper, this whole system feeds the roots, and the roots are pushing all of the strength into this whole system. So if you think of this as one unit, all the gasoline driving the motor that's generating the growth, all of these needles are feeding this, which is pushing energy into this, okay? So we want to be cognizant of that as we develop trees, particularly when we're working with pines. Okay? So I'm going to leave you guys with a few more options. Okay. Any questions so far? Very, very quiet this afternoon. Do I have to be cognizant of dieback on a Scots Pine? Typically, Scots Pine will not die back. It's a very strong species unless we repot immediately after styling. So if you get bleeding in the roots and bleeding in the top at the same time, definitely dieback starts to become an issue, right? But if you just have bleeding in the top, you just prune the top, style the top, don't touch the roots, Scots Pine are virtually bulletproof. A very strong species of tree, much stronger than a black pine. Okay? All right, so I'm going to set some structure for you guys here. This is going to be a little bit heavier wire, and probably hear some grunting and groaning. Do the same thing as we did earlier. The priority when we start setting structure on a tree like this is to show as little wire as we possibly can. Okay, so as opposed to wire being something that we say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's only going to be on there temporarily. I don't know a whole lot of bonsai that only have wire on them for a short period of their life. Right? If you think about this tree becoming a mature bonsai, you're probably talking at least 12 to 15 years before this tree ever has a time where it can be shown without wire. So that means 10 to 15 years of its life, of your life, looking at this, it's got to be wired. It makes sense for that wire to look beautiful. Do you agree? Yeah, yeah. So anything where you say, oh, you know what, it's not going to have wire that long, it's not a big deal, it's a big deal. Big deal. I'm going to give you guys a few tips on structural wire. Look at this guy. Has anybody ever taught you how to apply thick wire? Books, magazines, movies? Are there secrets to it? It's a loaded question. Are there secrets? Okay. When you guys apply structural wire, there's very much a technique to getting structural wire to work for you. Okay? I'm going to use this in the open so that you can see. Most important part of applying thick wire successfully is the hand that is not actively applying the wire. Okay? So it's like a magician. You guys are always going to be watching this hand that's moving, right? It's magic, abracadabra, abracadabra. But you're not seeing what's happening here. That's the whole goal of the magician, right? This is all disguised. I'm doing all my sleight of hand here while I'm keeping your eye busy. That's why they do all that. Okay? As you're functioning with structural wire and you're moving here, the most important thing that's going on is this being supported here. Okay? So if you notice where my fingers are, I'm always holding 2 coils back. One here, 1, 2. Okay? Because this wire doesn't want to be bent like this. It's just fine being straight. Okay? And this branch is not perfectly cylindrical, and it's not perfectly straight, which means the wire has to contort to have contact with the branch. Right? So if I'm supporting 2 wraps back, that means everywhere I go with this wire, there's no way that it can bend 2 locations back. And as I follow this out, I'm always going to maintain contact with two locations. That make sense? Okay, so in doing so, I make sure that I don't get separation of the wire from the branch. No spaces. Okay? Structural wire does not function with spaces. Now, as I'm applying this, we all say, I don't like thicker wire because it's so hard. It's hard to apply, right? Well, thicker wire is just a lever. How does a lever work? The longer the lever arm, the less force you have to apply here to apply force here. Does that make sense? So if we have a long lever arm and we function at the end of this, we technically have to apply less force to get this to bend at the point where we hope it's applied to the branch. Make sense? Okay? So if we use this length, we actually have to work very little as long as we're guiding this and maintaining contact to get this wire applied to the branch. I could wire this entire thin branch with this very thick gauge of wire just by using the tip of the wire. Okay? Leverage. It's just about leverage. All right? Big tips for you guys. Get these main branches set. Does anybody have any questions? No? Yeah, it is tight. How long will it stay on the pine? It's going to stay on the pine as long as the pine needs it to stay on to hold its position. Okay? Until it absolutely starts cutting in. Right? So when we talk about conifers, one of the advantages of dealing with conifers is they form bark. Right? And bark hides a lot of things that wire causes, i.e. scarring. Right? So if this wire bites in a little bit, that formation of the bark as this tree matures is going to disguise some of the damage that that wire causes. So we have a little bit of leeway in terms of how long we can leave this wire on. The longer we leave it on, the better it's going to hold. Okay? Because as this tree grows, it's acquiring newer and greater thickness of layers of growth. And those layers of growth